From New Jersey, this is Low Fidelity. I'm Jeff Heller.
And I'm Mike Labrie. On this episode, we will be reviewing Tongs by Animal Collective.
You can support Low Fidelity by reviewing us on iTunes, subscribing to us on our Reddit and YouTube channels, and by following at Lo-Fi Podcast on Twitter.
All the links you need are in the description of this episode. You are always welcome to share any feedback in the comments or send us an email, feedback@lowfidelity.info.
Welcome to Low Fidelity, everybody. Before we get to our review, we had a little bit of feedback that I was getting after our last episode about ambitious projects. The format of that episode worked pretty well because we had an outline and questions we were answering, and we bring some of that into the album reviews that we do. Well, we could do elements of it. I feel that it was a very good structure for that particular topic. It's not to say, however, that all the albums we review are ambitious.
Or really have questions to be answered.
That's true, because when we get into our album reviews, we're looking at that from a perspective of what is best for that album. In the case of Tongs, we might be asking some questions about what the intention is behind the album that we wouldn't be asking for other albums, like, for example, with Thriller. We know why that was made. There's not really a way to question it. Here, it's a little bit more ambiguous. So when questions appear, then we can answer them. But I think it works still in a looser format than with ambitious projects, where it's like the focus is on how crazy it is that thing was made. Whereas here, it's more about what is best for the album itself. So without further ado, let's get to our review.
Animal Collective were formed in Baltimore County, Maryland by longtime friends and musical collaborators David Portner, Noah Lennox, Josh Dibb, and Brian Weitz, under the nickname Avey, Tare, Panda Bear, Deacon, and Geologist, respectively.
Beginning in 2000, projects were released under these pseudonyms until 2003, when the name Animal Collective was adopted to allow members the freedom to work in various combinations under one moniker. The group's sound fluctuates through various forms of experimental styles such as noise rock, freak folk, and indie electronic, with Avey Tare's penchant for horror film dynamics providing the energetic force that earned them their earliest fans.
After 2003's abrasive but heavily textured Here Comes the Indian, Avey Tare and Panda Bear began touring stripped-down material before flying off to Lamar, Colorado with friend and fellow New York musician Rusty Santos to record their next album.
With 2 guitars, 1 drum, Beach Boys-inspired vocal harmonies, psychedelia-tinged nostalgia, and unrestrained production, Tongs aims to remind us of the limitless possibilities of immaturity sung through the lens of the wisdom of youth. Mike, we've discussed before how when we go into albums, I've got some kind of ulterior motive. And in this case, I can't say that I have too much of a motive for this one as compared to other albums.
All right, I was curious about that. I can tell you, as I was listening to this album, it was Jeff just wants me to listen to one of his favorite albums, and I'm fine with that.
Well, let's compare real quick to what we'd done before.
Yeah.
Because I'd say our catalog so far has been rather pop-oriented. Starting off with Michael Jackson's Thriller is a big move, but then going into Fleetwood Mac or even Yellow Magic Orchestra, I mean, these are popular albums.
Right, and we had been stuck in kind of like this 5-year period of 78 to 82-ish, and now we're contemporary here.
Yes,
sort of.
Contemporary and very independent. Whereas with, let's say, John Prine or XTC, it was that they were very geared towards getting more mainstream, but just not gaining that audience or having limitations to the audience.
Yeah.
With this, I think it's pretty clear that there's no seeking a massive audience with this. This is really structured for, let's say, a core set of fans, but more so within the ambitions of the artists themselves. Like something that they just wanted to put out under their own style. It is pretty clear from the history of the band, looking at their earliest works and going into what would become a very successful run of albums in the later 2000s, that they really are artists for themselves, that they're not doing this for anyone besides themselves, that they wouldn't be doing anything else with their lives. This is really what they were set to do with their career.
Like we were talking, it sounded like they were just doing this anyway, and then it came like, well, if we're gonna be doing this anyway, I guess we can kind of do this commercially. Let's come up with a name. Let's just keep doing what we're doing anyway, but here's a name for it.
Yeah, that's what I really do think is interesting about the band's story, is the fact that they were putting out releases since 2000 under their own names, and then decided Animal Collective fits as a name for this group, and we can just let members come in and out. Whatever subject we want to tackle, we do it with whoever's available. And then we put that out, and then we go and do the next thing. And with music so unconventional like this, when you compare it to the pop-oriented stuff we've been listening to, they have that freedom. They really aren't tied to any particular thing, especially with the wide variety that they've gone to. Now, before we get into into what their sound is specifically, especially for people who've never heard of them, we're just going to real quick talk about how we got introduced to the band. When Phish broke up in 2004, before coming back in 2009 anyway, my sister, who was a huge fan of Phish, was basically doing what many Phish fans were doing at that time and looking for other acts to latch onto. And Animal Collective tended to be the act that a lot of these fans gravitated towards because of their connection to the Grateful Dead. And so this breakup happens after Tongs' release, so it makes sense that with this album getting some acclaim from indie publications that some of those fans would gravitate to this, though it would come a little bit later with their next album, Feels, and then Strawberry Jam would bring that to a bigger audience, and then Phish comes back in 2009, kind of settles all that. Now, my love of the band didn't really start with Feels. I liked a couple of tracks, but they were really just too weird for me, and I skipped Strawberry Jam. Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
All right.
I know, and I skipped Strawberry Jam because of that reason when that came out, I think 2007. But Merriweather Post Pavilion cemented my love of the group, and we will get to that album later on, but really that's where you could say my awareness of the band got brought in because of their almost surrender to accessibility with that album. And then that then encouraged me to go back. And then, of course, that's how we get to here. Now, I'm going to slightly spoil your story a little bit because if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have heard of Animal Collective.
Right. I mean, you basically told the story already, whereas you came into it with Merriweather Post Pavilion going, oh my God, this is fantastic. Let me go back and forth wherever you want to go from there. But I need to share it. Like we get into the Jeff that needs to share his musical obsessions. And that's what you did. You shared that album with me.
Really, Merriweather Post Pavilion is probably how most people have heard of Animal Collective at this point. I mean, the single My Girls was huge.
Yeah. Previously, I listened to an album that Jeff loved when it was new. Now I'm listening to an album that Jeff loves. Well, I guess I'm projecting here. many, many years after the fact. It's just a good, different kind of approach. I like it.
As usual, we're going to do our required listening. Tongs is really where the audience for Animal Collective gets a lot bigger because of how well this album does with its reviews and other facets. But it's really not a bad idea to go back and look at the stuff that they were doing before they were even Animal Collective. Their first album, which was just Panda and Avey Tare, and that pairing, by the way, is going to be doing Tongs as well. But originally, they did the album Spirit They've Gone, Spirit They've Vanished, and that's back in 2000. This was when they also did their own label to put out their material. Going from there to Here Comes the Indian, it's a weird range that they pull off in this case, and that's where we say, they fluctuate between styles, because when you look at noise rock or indie electronic or freak folk, right, there's that interesting genre title. You can hear the elements of that in their early stuff, but the abrasiveness is really what I think just comes through more than even the left field production. Is just how I mentioned in the intro, Avey Tare has this penchant for horror films. And you can hear that with just how striking some of these songs are, where it's total silence and then bam, here comes this harsh instrumentation and it goes back to silence. And then they just keep hitting you with this really crazed kind of sound that honestly, it defies words. So I think the best thing to do is just play a small sample of some of the crazier stuff that they've done in their past work. I think you get the idea by just how random a lot of these sounds are. Really, this is some heavily abrasive textures that are going on here.
Yeah, that's not just a casual listen right there.
We're going to have to bring in the idea that are drugs a facet of the band just with any type of music? Unless you're given full instruction from the artist to listen to it in a certain way, like we talked about with Flaming Lips Eureka specifically, it's best to assume you should be able to listen to this regardless of the external circumstances that you're under.
Yeah, art needs to stand alone.
Exactly. So that's kind of why we're tackling it from this perspective. Having said that, so if you want to be a little adventurous, go and check out the earlier material. You can also listen to the works of the artist Can. Can is a German experimental rock band that was formed in 1968 in Germany. They are the influence for a lot of bands out there, including Kraftwerk. With David Portner, or Avey Tare, as I'm going to refer to him in this review, with his horror film bent to things, which I can absolutely hear, and just how random things are a lot of the times and how they just seem to try to get you excited or scared or just be dynamic. Listening to horror film soundtracks like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or The Shining, or just watching the movies, that's definitely going to put you in the mindset of Avey Tare when he goes into...
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I definitely hear and acknowledge what you're saying. When I listen to Tongs, it's not that I'm listening to a horror movie soundtrack, but that atmosphere that it's building, definitely a correlation there.
Yes, it's trying to get you a little unnerved. It gets you away from your expectations of what you're getting from the music.
You're a little offbeat, you're a little off-put.
A little nauseating at times too.
Yeah.
So yes, it absolutely does help with that. That's what I would say is stuff that would be required listening before going into this to kind of get you into that mindset. Mike, what else do you think fits within this category?
Right. So let's do a little bit more of the spoiler behind the scenes kind of thing with how we came about to reviewing this album. You actually gave me a choice of a few bands, and I actually don't remember what the other ones are now. I looked at it and said, oh, Animal Collective. That's right. We reviewed Merryweather. I really love that album. Be cool to check out another album by that band. So that's what I went with. And then I think the first day I listened to it, I immediately texted you. It was like, what have I done? However, I see why, and again, I don't remember what the other albums are. I'd be real curious to see how they would connect with Tongs. I see why this would come after Tusk, because Tusk was a very experimental album for Fleetwood Mac, and I wouldn't say that the songs on Tusk sound like the songs on Tongs. I can't say all these words in a row, but you know where I'm going with this. But I feel that creative element just beeline between decades here. I feel it.
When you're given the opportunity to do whatever you want in a studio,
yep,
that's that thread that connects these two albums. Not to mention the fact that Avey Tare, he directly connects the song That's All for Everyone to his music in particular.
I can totally see that. Yeah, you got that atmospheric element to it. You got this kind of like drawn out vocal delivery, a little back away from the microphone a little bit.
To the point where you're worrying about them.
Yeah.
Or that you're seeing that you're getting this unfiltered view
right.
of what they want to create. And it's funny how Animal Collective does it here. Still, you could argue makes an attempt at being more accessible than their earlier work in particular, where they were going in their own direction, but it's so abrasive, so out there, that it's really hard to get attached to. Maybe that's why you don't see as high ratings for those albums, even though it did generate a lot of interest and got them their earliest fans. But going into Tongs, things change. So to start off, of course, we go into our thematic elements. The instrumentation on this is crazily bare, to the point of 2 guitars, like we said in the intro here, 2 guitars, 1 drum, vocal harmonies that we say are inspired by the Beach Boys. Certainly we'll get into that. And just these crazy production techniques. Stuff, yeah. And this includes Avey Tare's field recordings that he just happens to record all the time. He's one of those guys. He uses found sounds and records everything. Yeah. Not to say that the samples really provide a backbone to any of the music like we traditionally hear samples. Really, like you said, it's just stuff. And so a lot of that stuff is painting these environments around these characters that make up the songs. And is it distracting? I think we're going to do that on a song-by-song basis. But I do feel that instead of just having the 2 guitars and 1 drum, which could really limit the sound, I do feel that these samples tend to give it a little bit more breathing room, or at least give it a rhythm that 1 drum alone probably wouldn't be able to do. And another thing that I picked up, which I'm not sure that you picked this up too, Mike, a lot of these tracks tend to fluctuate between 2 chords, like Who Could Win a Rabbit or Good Lovin' Outside. There's these moments where it's 1 chord, another chord, 1 chord, another chord, and they just sway back and forth. And in Visiting Friends, it's a lot longer of a sway back and forth.
Yeah.
And there are other songs that have some pretty dense structures to them, but is that, again, a limitation that they put on themselves when writing this music?
Yeah.
So we don't know for sure what the intention is behind that simplicity, but when we look at the whole theme of the album, the lyrical theme in particular, which we'll get to, looking at this through the lens of the wisdom of youth that I was mentioning before, there is stuff here that is mature and immature. And I feel that they're mature about the restrictions, that they're going to stick to these particular instruments, that they're going to treat the way that they write lyrics in a very immature fashion, but they're mature about the fact that they're sticking to it.
Okay.
Whereas I think you could say in their earlier work, they bounced around too much. It didn't have much structure behind it or maturity behind it to keep it focused. Here, it's super focused, but
it is, yeah. And I didn't feel that way at first, and it took me Man, I have a lot of feelings and thoughts about this album as a whole.
So obviously you could say that I enjoy this album because it's here and we're reviewing it.
Right.
Also the fact that it started their track of well-regarded albums going into the late 2000s. But Mike, you're coming into this fresh with the knowledge of Merryweather being what you knew of Animal Collective. And I did warn you during that review that when you get into the earlier stuff, it's a lot more abrasive.
Sure.
Avey Tare screams, although he doesn't really scream in this album. But you tell me, going from that perspective into this, how did you take this album? How did it go?
Right. So exactly exactly that. I knew Merriweather was going to be the approachable one, and I was going backward, so it would be the same, but weirder, probably. Like, I hate to use such a nonsense word that means nothing. The album's weird. What does that even mean? Well, like, we'll get to that. So that's kind of how I approached it. And the first day I listened to it, I was actually at work. I was the only one in the office. I had all the windows open. Like, I'm just going to listen to the album. This is a great time to do it. I was plugging away at stuff. And I could have sworn there were kids outside laughing at me and there were birds chirping, except there actually were. I had no idea what was going on with this album. It was so confusing because that wasn't the right atmosphere for that album. To be in this brightly lit room, windows open, like nature around me, somehow that didn't make sense for the album, even though that's what the album kind of makes you feel, like you are out in the world. Being out in the world while listening to it was the wrong approach. And I was very, very angry with myself and with you at that moment. This album, Jeff, I will tell you, I've been listening to it for a month now, and you do this to me constantly. It's only the last week that I have come around on this album. For the longest time, I'm going, I like the atmosphere, but
it's hard to attach yourself to it, isn't it?
It really is. And I want to talk about that immaturity a little bit. I think they are completely overindulgent with their weirdness, for lack of a better phrase, that it's, you guys are doing it for you. That's great. I can't do anything with this, guys. Like, there's a couple songs here and there. I want to highlight two of them just right off the bat. So Leaf House, first track, it's great. I love the acoustic guitar. We've talked so much about how whatever music you're going to throw at me, if you include an acoustic guitar, that's how I was able to get into John Prine so quickly. It's like, I love it. And then Visiting Friends reminded me a lot of, and I'm sorry, I don't know if it's Mondo Grosso, Japanese artist. The one song in particular, I know a lot of video game fans will know from the game Luminous on PSP, which is actually getting re-released, Shinin'. Just that repetitive but rhythmic and cycling acoustic guitar that builds up and then strips itself down and then builds something else up around it. I was getting such a Shinin' vibe off of these two songs, and I was getting nothing out of any other song on this entire album. And there are so many reasons for that. I mean, I'm connecting to this part of the album, then like midway through the album. All right, that's enough to keep me listening through. And then they kind of worked their way inward from each of those songs to finally I was at the point where I could see the through line throughout the entire album. But it took a long time to get there.
I'm so glad that you bring that up, because what I hear in Sung Tongs, and another thematic element here really, is how they are presenting a different worldview or maybe a different environment. And what really works here is you feel that there is a world of its own in Sung Tongs, that
yes,
there is something that they're creating
the
here.
The world of Sung Tongs exists and you are visiting it.
And it has rules and it's structured and it can sustain itself through 12 songs. There are moments even where I tune out or don't like in particular, personal opinion, but we'll get to those moments. But really, you cannot deny that this establishes something that, whether you're going into it full force or you're going in piece by piece, it lives on its own in its own bubble and really feels like a cohesive set of songs. To me, I think I can make that argument much stronger for this album than with most other albums, where you could say, this doesn't really fit in here, or the sound's a little different, the quality's a little different. I feel like there is this theme that runs throughout sonically. They just go in very different directions with these limitations. And I think it's those limitations that kind of lead to that.
Yeah, you have that guitar throughout that. Like you said, there's only two guitars. You have that acoustic guitar driving you through track to track. It's always there. And it may be doing some different styles. You want to talk about styles just a little bit. Winter's Love, I feel like it's got this bit of flamenco flair to it almost. You've got that Spanish style going on, the tapping and the clicking, but it is that acoustic guitar that you're going to keep hearing just through and through each song.
The key to it for me was to identify the underlying melodicism that's there in these songs in particular.
Look for it first, because I was missing it at first, and that was really preventing me from getting into it.
All that said, this is all thematic stuff. It's very interesting to hear how your opinion has been changing over time with this, and I'm really curious to hear what jumped out at you and what didn't as we go into it, but we are going to do this track by track, and so that means we're going to start with track 1, Leaf House, which has a very interesting moment of sweeping electronic noise before we get into the acoustic guitar.
Yeah, and then we get to the meowing.
And the meowing at the end, yeah. A really interesting way to bookend this track. But in the middle of it, I think this is a stellar track 1 as an introduction to Animal Collective in the earlier stuff.
To the band, to the album, to their style, to everything. I feel like this is the perfect, all right, here's Animal Collective.
Especially because while we do have a rhythm, and really half the album is rhythmless and there is rhythm in the other half, with this in particular, you have to start off by getting the interest of the listener. Like you can't start with Visiting Friends, for example, which is just like a 12-minute minimalism piece. You have to have something that can draw a listener in. And I feel like with this, there's these really sublime minor chords that are played throughout the song. The guitar work is fantastic and the sequencing is great. Whether they're relying heavily on production techniques to keep themselves in tempo or in pitch or whatever, you don't really hear that, but you kind of do hear some cutting going on. That's just part of getting you used to what you're about to hear in the rest of the album. Is it off-putting, do you think, with this kind of sound where you can hear the cuts going on, the samples are in there, but not really in the musical parts? It's really just in the ending, if you will, that the samples are there.
Yeah, I think it does everything fine. It's until you get to that ending, and that's what's going to continue into track 2. When we get the kitties meowing, you lost me with the immaturity coming in. Like, why are you meowing? Not to throw away this track already, but that takes you into Who Could Win a Rabbit, and it's just total nonsense lyrics. And to me, this is Animal Collective getting lost in their self-indulgence of, we're just going to be crazy and just babble over here, and there are sounds all over the place over here, and it's already lost me a little bit by this point.
Well, I'm going to argue a little bit on the lyrical side of things, because I actually really like the lyrics when I can understand them. That's an asterisk.
That is such a huge issue. I started making that note on so many songs. It's, what is the point of interesting, deep, bizarre lyrics even when the listener can't hear them? They are completely unintelligible. So, all right, you're a fantastic artist that did this amazing thing. You wrote wonderful words. I can't hear them, so what's the point? But is that just cranky old Mike where it's, I need to have a very a very good singer-songwriter with perfect diction? Like, is that just what I'm looking for and this just isn't for me?
You know, this is a wonderful question, because part of the problem with being a fan of the album is you want to have some kind of connection to the lyrics. There are prime examples where lyrics are not the big focus, or in some case, the artist thinks that they're so bad that they've intentionally hide them from the listener, which is the case of like My Bloody Valentine's Loveless. Huge example of that, where the lyrics are so driven under the production because the artists themselves think they're terrible.
Yeah.
So is that happening here? And I honestly do not think that they think that way, but they don't have to capitulate to the pop music audience, which demands the lyrics be out front and understandable.
Right.
So to your point, I agree. There is that self-indulgence where they're saying, hey, we don't need to listen to anybody else on this. We can do our own thing. If we want to do these cryptic lyrics, that's fine. We know what the meanings are, and that's all there is to it. In the case of Leaf House, before we get into Who Could Win a Rabbit track 2, there's something really interesting here. And that is first what people thought the lyrics were about.
Oh, okay.
And what it turned out to be about, thanks to Avey Tare, again, not being the one to be silent online. He actually did an AMA on Reddit and answered some of these questions.
All right, tell me.
But the original thought behind Leaf House was that it linked to a particular novel, House of Leaves, by Mark Danielewski. This is a book that came out in March 2000. So time-wise, it would have fit in well.
Okay.
And what House of Leaves does, which is really interesting, and Mike, you might want to even look and Google image search for a novel.
Okay.
Because the format of the layout of the text is what drew people in. Nuts, right?
That's Animal Collective on the printed page.
Right. And so that was what people were thinking. Like, there has to be a connection here because this is just as off the wall as the music is, right? Like, there has to be. Not just that, but in the lyrics, we have this hermetic figure because when someone comes, they'd hide. He has this connection to cats and, of course, the kitties meow, etc. Also, the house is sad. The house is a character in this novel, so that has some connections to it.
House of Leaves, Leaf House, like that alone is enough.
But it turns out it's not about this novel at all.
Wow.
Or at least that's what Avey Tare is saying.
Sure.
What I'm going to do here is I'm going to reference the Reddit AMA where Avey Tare answers the question of, is Leaf House about the novel House of Leaves? And Avey said, no, Leaf House was a reference to the house Noah grew up in, Panda Bear in this case. I believe it touches on the feelings of Noah's father passing and no longer being around. I read that book not long ago. It's great. So only later did he actually read the book.
Yeah.
But really it's about Noah Lennox. What he's referencing there is Noah Lennox's father passing away in, I believe, 2002 of brain cancer.
Got it.
So he's no longer in the house. That is evoking these emotions of loss. And especially in this case, the character hides when someone comes to the door, almost like a metaphorical thing of this person no longer there.
Yeah, and also the cat kind of as well. You know, some of my cats run away when Jeff shows up.
You're right. Now, let's go into Who Could Win a Rabbit, where again, lyrically, I feel that this is one of the strongest parts of the album where lyrics do play a role in what you think of the song, if you can decipher them, of course.
Right. And I did a couple listen throughs with the lyrics to every song up, but I just didn't care. So you're going to have to sell me on it. Because like I said earlier, I feel like they are just losing me in their self-indulgence here.
Right. Well, the problem is I'm going to have to guess at some of these lyrics because, again, there's no official lyric sheet anywhere.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so people have been just putting their own transcriptions out there, which depending on who you check, you're going to get a different perspective.
Okay.
But at the same point, all these perspectives tend to point in the same direction, which I find really interesting. So even though we can't get direct lyrics, we can at least get a hint of what direction they're heading in. And in the case of Who Could Win a Rabbit, that is definitely the case. The first line I think is the easiest to decipher, and that is hungry bread and butter hustle, which right there should explain everything about the song in one line. And I think it's a genius way to start. So let me just break it down a bit. A bread and butter hustle. If you are doing your bread and butter, you are performing an act that you're very skilled at. It would only make sense that you're doing that to make money, which is your way of getting around the world. You have to make the money in order to live your life, right? Doing the bread and butter hustle means that you're hustling at it. This has become your lifestyle, basically, is to work yourself.
Yep.
And especially when it's a hungry bread and butter hustle, that is bringing into the metaphor the fact that you're constantly hungering for the bread and butter hustle. So you're constantly working yourself.
Are you hungry for the hustle, or are you literally hungry and you have to hustle because you're not going to eat if you don't perform your bread and butter?
I would go with the more metaphorical aspect, but I could see it being both ways, honestly.
Yeah. Okay.
But that sets up the idea that this person is working themselves thin.
They have a thing and they're working at it hard.
Right.
Okay.
You'll be doing it a while, livers only fail.
Right.
Or you've been doing it a while, it is only fair. Something along the lines of, you've been doing this forever, so of course this is how you're going about your business. But they are asking the person, where's your relaxation? Where's the time required for your health? Mm-hmm. Continuing on, been hating on my new perspective. Either they're saying this person or these people, like this massive amount of people that they're living the world with, is saying, no, don't slow down. You can't take it easy. You have to be up and up with everything. But they're going to continue with that hurrying along. No meal is ever done. You could win a rabbit, sort of like saying, here's this carnival prize of a rabbit that you just won. What does it really mean to you? Like this, is this actually what you were working for? Is this meaningless festival prize? And then they get into the whole thing with the child who's going to have a dead hand, which is supposedly a reference to a stroke. They return to the point of, glad you brought your food on, eat it like it's going to get away.
Yeah.
And connecting to the rabbit idea, that's a genius connection there, because they're saying you could win a rabbit, this festival prize, but
good luck catching it.
Good luck catching it.
Yeah.
And you better eat it before it runs away. Mm-hmm. So this hungry idea, this bread and butter hustle, we can hear it throughout the song, is saying you should really slow down. And what's going on in the music here? In the music, you hear, again, the shifting between two chords back and forth, like I keep talking about in the verses, but it's this loud guitar, right? Like there's something that would be attributed more to a pop music oriented feel or a singer-songwriter feel. And they're really jamming on the guitar loudly in this case. I do feel that this song connects to its message the best through its lyrics. Even though there are some cryptic passages to it, it still gives you the sense of someone being rushed, or most people being rushed, and just having the need to relax, calm down. That's another way of approaching life, not having to continually chase the rabbit. So having said that.
Right. As many issues as I had with the lyrics on Win a Rabbit, we get to Softest Voice. This is, when I was having my first listen through, this is what really prompted my message to you, where I'm going, this is just noise. We are not in music territory here. And we get these things like the blah noises. And I feel like this is just you're drunk on the floor at 3 a.m. just making noises, and there's your track 3. Like, I can't get behind it here. And I still, even in this last week when I've decided that I like this album, track 3 is still, I'm just going to skip ahead.
How surprised are you going to be when I tell you that I agree with you?
I love it when you agree with me. It makes me so happy.
Well, I don't want to say we're in the minority. At least from what I've noticed, this is a beloved song by a lot of people. And I have a hard time with it. I hope the explanation is good enough for my hesitation on it. Really, it has to do with two things. I don't feel the music does anything in the time that it has in this formless shape. Now, we'll talk about the interesting parallel between side 1 and side 2 of this album. I tend to think of it as two sides.
Okay. And can we mention right there as well that this is one of the longer songs? There are others that get into the 5-minute range. Visiting Friends obviously is going to be the long one, but we're at 6:40 2:46 here, it looks like.
That's right. And so this length is taken on a direction which, again, we're going through 2 chords or 2 keys in the song here, and it's happening very slowly. It's very gentle playing. It's very sweet, but we've argued this point before where if the music isn't going to be that interesting, referencing John Prine here, if the music isn't going to be that interesting, the lyrics have to make up for it.
I need good lyrics. I need good delivery, like good acting as a part of the delivery. I need something else, and nothing does it here for me.
Not to mention, and this is a lyric I bring out because I find it hilarious that I'm positioned to treat this seriously. The softest voice said to me all through last night, I forget, but I won't feel bad about it. You're literally telling me here that the softest voice, the point of the song, because you titled it The Softest Voice, and you forgot.
Are they telling me as the listener to forget about this song?
No, I think more so that the softest voice said something and they forgot what it was. Why should I care? I mean,
and why is it track 3 but at the end or something?
When we come off of Who Could Win a Rabbit and get into this, what a shift in tone, right? It definitely doesn't have the same kind of transition power. It's not that it consistently happens where we shift in 180 degrees like we did with Tusk, when one track after the other was a 180 turn, and it really worked well. Here, it's a bit too soon, it feels like, but also the song itself doesn't really attribute itself to something that I can gravitate towards, and that's why I really can't get into this, even though it's a really beautifully played song. I think the mixing of the 2 guitars is really nice here, but that's it. Doesn't do much more than that. And that's going to take us into track 4, Winter's Love.
Well, coming off of the previous track, whatever you want to give me, I guess I'm game for, because what could it be? And that's why I like that. I don't know what else to call it, but of a flamenco flair to it, where we're clapping and we got the strumming going on and the clicking, everything going on underneath it. I thought it was just a good new atmosphere to go in. And this is the song where I felt, the through line is the rhythmic guitar. This is where that really solidified itself for me.
I also really love how there's this first part of the track, which is just, like I said, this more flamenco style to it. But then it gets into the actual intention of the song in the second half, I guess. And I think that it spotlights the melody as sort of a lullaby because it's very elemental in a way. And so playing it off as an instrumental in the beginning establishes that idea before they take it into more serious territory and put lyrics upon it. The guitars are heavier, right? I mean, especially when those guitars ring in the second half, like they are much heavier here. So it's not as distant feeling as it was. Because this track is called Winter's Love, you could theoretically say that they're trying to mimic this sort of winter environment in the first half, and then they expand upon it in the second half. Maybe that's what they're doing. I find the lyrical content interesting here as well, because we're getting 2 perspectives. I don't know if you picked up on this. Avey, Tare, and Panda Bear, they sound really similar. And in this track, we're actually hearing both of them. The first half of the lyrics go to Avey Tare and his perspective on Winter's Love, and then we get Panda Bear's take in the second half. And this is quite fascinating, because to me it sounds like they came up with the song, or they came up with this idea, and they went into their own corners to come up with the lyrics behind what they felt Winter's Love was about. And here they are putting both their takes together and seamlessly going from one to the next. But did you notice that it was the switching of Avey Tare to Panda Bear here?
I did not. No, I wasn't picking up on that. It's another one of those things where, all right, give me another week. I start picking out more of these layers. Only in the last week have I come around to the album in the first place. So,
all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pull up an interview from Animal Collective, where we can hear not only Avey Tare and Panda Bear, but geologist as well, Brian Weitz. And you can hear just how strangely close their voices are.
All right.
I'm Dave, Avey Tare in the band.
I'm Brian, I'm geologist.
And I'm Noah, Panda Bear.
All right, so I feel justified in you asking me, could you tell the difference in the performance, and saying no.
Oh, totally. I think Panda Bear and Avey Tare, specifically here, sound so similar. And that's why the vocal harmonies work, because they are very similar in tone.
Yeah, if you didn't know, you'd think it was like a double track vocal or something.
The Beach Boys comparison here makes a lot of sense, especially in this song.
Okay.
But this is a much beloved track. I can see why. I think it's really sweet. There's this great lyric in here about Winter's Love. Where could she be? She's warming in my pocket, cuddling as being in someone's pocket. pocket. And that's Avey Tare's take on things, whereas Panda Bear is more like, I pulled the boy out of his box and made that boy a man. Seeing these two perspectives on this time of year, I think it works really well here. And I think it's a very sweet song. And certainly coming after the sweetest voice, it's refreshing.
It starts to bring you back into the world of Animal Collective for reals.
Agreed. All right, going into Kids on Holiday here.
Can I surprise you a little bit?
Yes.
At least maybe. This is my second favorite song on the album.
I love this song too.
Good. All right. So,
well, I need to know, what is it about this song that you like so much?
I think it's the vocal delivery. There's two aspects to it. One, I can understand them. That's helpful. I like the rhythmic delivery to the vocals.
Are you waiting for me at the end of the airport? I'm off buying our tickets. Lines are in hibernation, but I'm feeling impatient. We were late in departing, and the smell of pajamas is what made me feel frivolous. There are minutes for sleeping, but we didn't have minutes to bed.
Just that tone to it, I love it. There's just something off about it that's pulling me in at the same time. This is one of the songs I actually did a little reading on as well. I was stuck in an airport myself earlier this week for many hours due to a delay.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah. What I enjoyed reading about this was them just being in airports or places of travel and just hearing the things that families and people would say around them, and just that the half phrases you would hear from people as they would pass by. And that really resonated with me this week. So I think this song, it was already high up there for me, but I lived this recently, so it jumped up.
Again, Mike, I bring up the point of the two chords going back and forth here.
Yeah.
And it works to such effect because they do it quickly, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And comparing that with the weird screaming that you hear in the background.
The laughing.
Oh, that was
stuff.
incredible. The samples here are so good too. The environment that they paint makes so much sense in the context of the lyrics.
This is the song that truly painted a world for me.
When you think about them being on tour, right?
Right.
And they're waiting in airports, and
touring is a lot of sitting around and waiting.
And they have no choice, especially in airports post 2001, where you can't go back and forth between security. When you get past that checkpoint, you are stuck there.
I am old enough to remember when you could walk up to the gate and wait for someone there.
Yeah, right. That's definitely long gone. So in that perspective, where when you've signed in and you're now in the terminal, you're stuck there. That's it. And you have no choice but to look around as you're waiting, because they tell you have to be there 2 hours early. So you get past security in 10 minutes and you're there for an hour and 50 minutes while your flight gets delayed for 6 hours. And you have no choice. You've got to be there with those people.
Too close to home, man.
There's all these different kinds of people. You've got they say a retard in the lyrics here. Mm-hmm. When they play it live and he says cripple, I'm like, okay, that's not really
not that much better, but I see what you're doing.
But the boy who's a Krishna, the family who yells that they ordered a Lincoln, but they got a compact. And the lyrics here are legible, which makes it that much more interesting of a song. Completely agree with you here. And I just feel like the music plays along with that because it doesn't shift at all until we get to the end and there's this chanting of holiday, like they were Krishna.
Yeah. It was the first song that I was able to individually identify on the album, and it just stuck with me the whole time. So tell me about the 1 minute and 15 song Sweet Road.
I don't have much for you.
I don't even remember what it is. That's a problem. It's that thing that's in between the song I like and then my favorite song. It's catchy. It's got this little kind of thing to it, but it just feels like filler. Jeff, not that this was originally vinyl. Where does this fit on the vinyl?
I think it's the end of the second side of disc 1.
I can see that. It's like, oh, just tack it on.
I think so. I am slightly connected to this more than you are.
Yeah.
Because the title of my note on this is Bambi on Acid, because it's setting the natural rural environment away from urban settings. We are specifically here in nature, surrounded by the noise of kids in the background. I think in this case we hear, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, this is the song I think when I was at work, I'm like, who is talking to me right now?
Yeah, so it sets an environment and I like that. Lyrically, I can't really attach myself to this.
It's just so short. It can't do anything in the time it exists.
Yeah, and what am I supposed to do with a line like, it's a road and not a soda? At this point, I'm not used to them doing non sequiturs.
Sure.
But it feels a little strange. At the same time, I'm understanding that I can't take the lyrics literally, and I can't take them as they are. I just have to let them be, but it doesn't help me get attached to this, especially with the short length of 1:15. But as an ending track to the first vinyl disc, I think it actually works perfectly, because the next track is going to be a standout, even though most people call it boring. I think, though, Yeah, no, seriously.
Wow.
I think that it does a great job in transitioning. But before we get into the next disc, two things I want to do first.
Yes.
I want to bring another thematic element out.
Okay.
And that is a very interesting parallel going on here between disc 1 and disc 2, or theoretically side 1 and side 2, depending on how this is released or how you're listening to it. In the first 6 tracks, these have a very consistent rhythm throughout, except for track 3 with the softest voice, where it drifts a bit and there's not really a tempo we can follow. When we get into the next side, most of the songs are rhythmless, except for track 3, which has a consistent rhythm. It's fascinating to me that both sides have either all this rhythm or no rhythm,
All in or none in. Yeah.
except for track 3. What is it about track 3 on both sides that is the opposite? And does it have to do with pacing?
Well, they're like two unique, independent, but complete thoughts. And at each point along the way, you have just this, I don't know if it's a deviation or just like, all right, here's the point I'm going to make here. And then we will continue off of that from here.
Now, as an intermission to this review, what I'd like to do is play a song that really, I would say, is a cover of Leaf House. And I composed it in Logic Pro. I'm a huge fan of using that software to make music. I don't do that much in it, really. I just do experiments or fun stuff. And I edit the show in that too, of course. But I wanted to show you, Mike, the underlying melodicism that I mentioned before. And when you're able to tap into that, that then brings your attachment to the song that much deeper. Essentially, this is what I hear in my ears if this were to be a more conventional track. When you take out all the electronics, that is the underlying melodicism that Animal Collective have that I absolutely love.
And it took me a while to hear it in your version, but as soon as I just like, oh, you're right. That is that song.
That is what I'm hoping other people can take from this, is the idea that you can hear some really good progression going on. You just have to listen for it, peel back some of the production, but appreciate the production, of course, because that is creating this environment. There you have it, my version of Leaf House done in Logic Pro. I need to credit Alexandra Crane Creme on YouTube. She posted a video of her playing something really similar to this, actually. And it's because her version was first done years ago. I think in 2007 she recorded it, but it's just off of her phone cam, basically, or a small camera. And so the audio quality wasn't that great. And I really wanted to play that, but because of the low quality, I felt it hid a lot of the great detail that's there. So I decided to just redo it myself and throw in my own take on it. Credit to Alexandra Krem. She did an amazing version as well, worth checking out on YouTube. All right, we're going to go into this mammoth track that opens up side B or disc 2, and that is Visiting Friends. I have to say, looking at your expression, I am shocked.
Really?
Shocked that you enjoy this as much as you do.
All right, so let me talk you through it. And actually, no, you talk it through to me. So you know what I do on the side. I run a big website. I do a lot of work for it. What do you imagine I do on a daily basis working on Consenshu?
Well, I only imagine that you're sitting in front of the computer. You've got a lot of task-driven stuff that you have to do where you don't necessarily need to think about what you're doing, but it's such a repetitive process that you just have to go and do this thing on a repeated basis, which means that there's a lot of heavy repetition in what you do.
And I don't want a lot of distractions. So to have a single track that is going to go through its own movements for sure, but it's still going to take me 12 and a half minutes, that it's perfect for what I do. And that takes me, like, I was working on stuff when I was first listening to this album going, I'm in my zone. It's just a zone song. It's a mood song. It's an atmosphere song. It's rhythmic. It's repetitive. It's everything that I needed as I was listening to this album for the first couple times, working on other things.
So how surprised are you going to be to hear, and we say this with every review, there's that song where you first listen to it, or the first couple times you've heard it, and okay, whatever. Then you start to review it for the purpose of reviewing an album, and that is where you really get into it and you enjoy the hell out of it. And I got to tell you, that is exactly what happened here with Visiting Friends, where I could not listen to this because it was that song, worse than The Softest Voice. It was that song that went on forever.
Well, and you're the kind of person that I envision you when you sit to listen to music. You are sitting to listen to music. And so if you're stuck in the same world of the same song for 12 minutes, even Jeff's going to get bored.
But that's not how I am, because I love this type of music called minimalism, which is, you could say, an orchestral music movement of, I'd say, late 60s, early 70s and onward. Minimalism is the idea that you have this repeating motif and it goes on and on and on, but it slowly shifts over that time frame. And so a track like this fits in within the minimalism spectrum, no problem. But the problem with it is that this was a more minimalism and it drove me nuts. And I couldn't get into it because the guitars didn't have any form. That's something that minimalism does have, is a rhythm, and this did not. And so I was getting really lost in it and just couldn't attach myself to it. Getting into this review and listening to it from a critical perspective, the rhythm here in the first half, it's not really there. It's more of a meshing of guitar, but at some point it hits the sweet spot. I think it's when they get to the part about the cop and his visiting hands, and all of a sudden the strumming gets down to a tempo, and then this tempo continues onward, and they build upon it, and then there's a rhythm there, and it's phenomenal because it starts off so formless and ethereal, and it gets into something practical.
While you're listening to it, you don't realize the journey the song's taking you on until you get to the end. Like, we have changed.
It's crazy to me that I did not notice that when listening to this, or just the fact that I'm looking at 12 minutes as a length, hearing this repetitive thing, and just being so intimidated that I can't give it a chance. I cannot say enough how much you have to look past that and really listen to the thing as a whole, devote the 12 minutes without any distraction, and just do something repetitive, or just be in the right mindset to take this long form and really give it the time it deserves, because it takes a long time, but I feel the payoff is so worth it. While lyrically, I have issues here and there with it. I think it's a little too obtuse about the drug content here. Clearly, within the first few lines, it's talking about getting stoned. There's a couple lines here and there that have to do with marijuana in this case, or just getting stoned in general. That's not something that I'm particularly drawn to. Like, that's not something that I feel makes a song interesting. It does give me a sense of the artists and their environment, but I think it goes too far in that direction here.
Yep, it does. And thankfully, just the instrumentation of the song is enough to carry me.
Well, let me step away from that now.
Are you going to ruin the song for me now?
No, I won't do that. But I'm going to conflict myself here.
All right.
And just argue that I can absolutely connect under the influence of something I've read elsewhere, where the lyrics are not so much about getting stoned as they are about you being a participant in, let's say, a party or a gathering, or you're with friends that you're just starting to get to know, but you haven't gotten fully comfortable with. And so you're doing these things, like whether it be drinking or drugs or some kind of altered state with people that you're not truly familiar with. And there's that uneasiness and that tension there where you want to kind of be on their good side, or maybe you don't care, but you are trying to be like, you don't want to be the person who brings down the party, like the killjoy, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that awkward mixture of things and emotions. But as it continues, things get more comfortable. And when the rhythm gets there, it feels like, okay, I'm now with this group. It's comfortable. I trust these people. That transformation, I can't say that's all of my college years, but that's a good percentage of my college years where I go to art school and there's all these really unique characters and they're all on their own thing.
Everyone's got to click. Yeah, you're traveling between groups. Sure.
Yep. I'm sure that if you've had that college experience, you've probably felt this way before going into this. That's at least what I pull into it. And I think if you go into it with that mindset, with that attitude, you're really going to enjoy this a lot more. So then let's talk about why you might not want to go to college.
I was going to say, Jeff, speaking of art school, you don't have to go to college.
I love this track.
I do too. It actually comes off of Visiting Friends really well.
Now, there's something interesting to this track.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that it's 53 seconds
it's under a minute, yeah.
I actually have some text from Avey Tare, again, another interview. But here's what Avey Tare had to say about college. Actually, I just threw that line in there to make it funny and to be anti-Beach Boys, because the song is so Beach Boys to begin with. You know, it's like the anti-be true to your school mentality of the 50s. Also, Noah and I are both college dropouts. And yes, it's something I do believe. It's not like I think no one should go to college, but I think a lot of kids are pressured by their parents or schools to keep going when it's something they are either unsure about or don't want. I think it's created a society of young people who actually don't even care about learning and only care about having comfortable jobs. And they aren't even that comfortable because they are led to believe that's what's best for them. It also makes a lot of young people scared to do what they actually believe in and be less independent. The point being, we didn't say don't go to college. We just said you don't have to go to college. But also, most colleges and universities really aren't worth the amount of money you pay for them. Sometimes you can learn just as much out of school as you can in, and for a lot less money. I guess I just wonder what else that money could be used for.
Well, Jeff, I love all that, and I don't disagree with any of that. I would like to hear that song, because that's not here. It's just the one phrase.
You don't have to go to college.
They have more to say about it, and all we get out of it is just do. All right, next song.
Yes, but
that's also just like, that's such basic everyday commentary that maybe I don't really want to hear anymore about a successful white dude telling me I have to go to college. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I appreciate. It's not preachy. It's like you don't have to go to college. It's the only thing the song has to say. The song had a lot of power with an audience, because Avey would say, we got emails from fans saying, thank you for saying that. No one else was saying that. They didn't have to say anything besides, you don't have to go to college. And that had the impact that it had.
Yeah. Yeah, here's the problem with the rest of the album. I don't remember any of the individual tracks by name.
Oh, I was so disappointed, because We Tigers to me is such a standout.
Well, I remember certain elements. Like, all right, so do you remember the Seinfeld episode where they're at the coffee place and Kramer's doing the... That's what I hear in this song.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, I don't think it's that sampled specifically, but as soon as I heard that whoop sound, like, oh, that's Kramer.
I only disagree on We Tigers because it's so forceful. That pounding drum. This is the song with rhythm in a batch of rhythmless songs here.
Well, like I said, it's not that I don't remember the songs, it's that I don't remember them by name. So that's part of the problem with me at the end of the album here.
I got to say, though, that I appreciate all the noises that are going on here. there seems to be, again, this immaturity that we're seeing very heavily here in We Tigers, where we're picking up sticks, there's sounds of our bones, all dogs invited, almost like a rough game of tag almost, right? Going back to that kind of immaturity where we're making up games, or we have this physically aggressive thing that we do that no one else does. It's just our group that does this. That chorus is particularly dynamic here, where it's just loud banging. The vocals aren't helping at all. And the fact that Avey Tare's vocal is warping in and out on the right ear.
Yes, yeah.
It's crazy, but I enjoy every second of it. I feel like this is a nice, upbeat way of tackling the regular rhythmlessness of the second half. And I appreciate it even more after watching them play it live.
Yeah.
People are jumping up and down like crazy manic. And at some point, as strange as this sounds, yes, there's kind of a mosh pit going on, but one guy actually succeeds in getting risen up and being crowd surfed during this song.
Nice.
Fantastic. I would never anticipate that would be the reaction to this particular song, but it's such a contrast in attitude and mood to the rest of the side that it makes perfect sense to me. It is hard to remember, though. I do agree. There's a lot of tracks here, especially where, yeah, in this last half, if you're not paying attention to specific moments, if the melody isn't as easily identifiable, they kind of blend here.
They do. The back end of the album really does blend together to me. It's not like Visiting Friends where I recognize this is one consistent song, but I do feel like I'm just coasting at this point.
I can definitely see that. We go into track 10, Mouth Wooed Her, which I believe is a clever play on Mouth Water that we hear in the second half of the track. Really, this track has two perspectives to it, or two sides to it. And we're still in this formless shape, but there's still a rule set to how things go. And I can't say that there's much here that I appreciate from a lyrical standpoint. I'm seeing that there's a crush involved. The lyrics of "My arms are peeling because you're so close, close to I." This person is radiant like the sun. That's cute. Being that close, it means you're going to need water to rehydrate, hence the water part that comes in later. I mean, that connects to this message, even though the message is still kind of nebulous.
Yeah, I got nothing from this song. And even as I listened to it again, like, yeah, I guess that was a song on this album. Sure. None of that came out to me.
I don't blame you at all. I would say the same thing about it myself listening to this early on. And I think what made me really appreciate it was the amount of skill or determination. Again, this maturity mixing with immaturity, where you need to have the maturity and discipline specifically to follow along with the song, and as a player, be able to play in time with the other person.
Yeah.
That requires so much skill with this particular track. It sways back and forth in terms of how quick it is, and especially when we get into the I don't want no section. You can't clap it out. There's no tempo that you can associate with. And so how are you syncing up so well with the other person when you have nothing there to guide your playing? And that's what I think is so extravagant about this. It's so hard to perform if you're not devoted to the message or the musicality behind it. The ending half with the claps that go on, right? Like they have the section where they're better drink it all, clap. These are rules that I was not a part of making. I wasn't in their clique when they did this, but it's enjoyable to watch this group of kids, you could say, playing this game with themselves. From an outsider's perspective, that's how I'm coming into it and enjoying it that way. Now, I hate to connect this to a song that we also weren't really into with The Softest Voice. I tend to put Good Lovin' Outside, track 11, in the same vein. What do you think?
Yeah, same way, where it's, that was a song on this album. It was slow, it was drawling.
I do feel at this point things get a little gratuitous, where they're being awkward for the sake of being awkward.
Right, that was that losing themselves in the self-indulgence I was talking about earlier. You hear a little bit early on. 3 and 11 are it.
I can see that, and I agree with it to a point, because here, it's not that the music doesn't do anything interesting, because again, there's that swaying back and forth that I really like between two chords. I've mentioned it 100 times. It's here again. What I'm not latching onto here is the lyrical content, specifically because it's in plain sight, and I'm really not happy about that. Clearly, with a track titled Good Lovin' Outside, you kind of know what you're getting into, and the lyrics aren't doing anything to hide it. We can loathe in moss all night. You're kind and sweet, and I feel your inside, and I'll kiss you in the kitchen, but there's lovin' outside. I'll touch you and you touch me. I'm like...
Yep, got it. Okay.
Right. You're not hiding anything. There's nothing for me to unearth here. And when the music isn't doing anything with that, besides that cool back and forth thing, which is sort of like the rolling around in the grass, which I really like, but I feel it's very surface value besides that. And that's really about it. I do think it's kind of a low point, but I wouldn't say that pacing wise, this is in the wrong place. I actually feel that it does a good job ending it.
I agree, because we're toward the very end of the album. We're the second to last track here.
Agreed. So then we'll go into What Had I Done? The last track, track 12.
Which I actually did like and do remember. There's something about, I like that blah, 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 blah kind of noises in it. Somehow it became one of the more memorable tracks to me, just for, it's weirdness, but for the samples going on and creating that world and kind of wrapping up what that world was.
Ooh, I guess we're going to disagree here, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because at this point in the album, I'm starting to think that these noises and techniques that they're doing don't work with the song, or they work with the song, but they're tacked on at the end as a way of saying, we need something to make this different.
I do completely agree, where a lot of it feels like, well, we still have this and we haven't used this, and all right, let's put these all together, and this is what the album is, right? I don't disagree with you, but it still feels right to me.
I like that you say that, because I have my on and off periods with this track in particular. I almost feel like I'm done listening at this point in the way that it ends.
Well, you are, so that's good.
Yeah, it's true. It's just that it doesn't, to me, reflect a true ending song where it's like capping the experience and reflecting back to the first track, making it cyclical in a way. It doesn't do that. It really does go off.
But it doesn't have to. Who says it has to?
Well, I think an album feels more complete when it cycles a bit, when we have some kind of moral or mode that gets repeated from the first track onto the last track.
I think it does. I can't tell you how many times I was listening to this album and I got 2 minutes into Leaf House and said, oh, we started over again. I think it does work in that respect.
Interesting. All right, then it's something I'm missing here. But I will say that I appreciate the way that they sing this. In particular, I'm not a huge fan of the vocals coming in and out like that. I mean, I love it in like the Kitty sample in Leaf House. I feel that's appropriate. The weird stuff going on in the right channel in We Tigers, that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Here it seems a little too gratuitous, and that's pulling me out. And again, it's a little gratuitous, but it fits within the greater context of the craziness that we hear in this album. I just wish some of the craziness lent itself more to what the track was about, and I can't tell what the track is about, so I don't really know how this fits in. They treat it almost too surface level in the mixture of all of this craziness.
Yeah.
Great. So that is what we have to say about Sung Tongs. Now that we've talked about it in this fashion, that we've gone through all the tracks like this, do you see yourself coming back to this at all? Because the reason why I ask this, you know this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to listen to, and I take years to figure this stuff out. And when I figure it out, I get very passionate about it. From your side of things, could you argue that what you listen to mainly has a very consistent rhythm throughout, that you don't get all of these weird, crazy background elements all the time? It's a little bit more straightforward, straight-laced, and you're put into the situation where you've got music where people are very self-indulgent. Do you see yourself coming back to this? And am I right about my characterization?
You're right about it. Will I come back to it as a whole? Like, am I going to sit down and say, I'm going to listen to Sung Tongs right now? Maybe once or twice, but probably not. Am I going to keep it? Absolutely. If it comes up on shuffle, am I going to listen to some of the songs? Probably. The ones that I do enjoy that can be listened to separate from the rest of their context. And I'm probably going to listen to Visiting Friends a lot as I'm working on stuff. I'm going to put that and I'm going to put it shining right next to it. And I'm just going to go for a loop of 20, 25 minutes, and it's going to be a great time. And that's enough for me, that I got something that I really enjoyed to that level out of it. I was listening to Merriweather before he showed up today. I think I'll just keep listening to that.
This is the kind of reaction I wanted to see, because Merriweather, in comparison to this, I know we bring this up with Merriweather often, but really it's because most people come to Animal Collective from that album just based on how well it did. If you're going to go into Sung Tongs, you have to do a lot of work to get into this. And we're going into the negative aspects here first, really. This is not an immediate album by any stretch, unless you have some familiarity with music not having a form, or with crazy samples going on, or with the type of production that you're hearing here. The way that you have to work to get at that melodicism, it's not stressful, but it's work if your background is not in this kind of music to begin with. And if you think this is bad, the stuff that they come from in their earlier work that references more of noise rock, much higher self-indulgency, yeah, that's the stuff that's really hard to get to. This is where I feel Animal Collective does a really good job of reining in some of the craziness and getting more of a pop aspect in there with these ringing guitars that are recorded so close. In comparison to Tusk, where instruments are pushed away and very distant, whereas in some tracks they're brought up to the front, here the guitars are always there because there's nothing else in the instrumentation. They have to be. And that just creates this really warm sound and environment, which if you can locate that and really pay attention to it, that will definitely bring your enjoyment of this album forth. Now, I want to get into the reception of the album, and I've got 2 reviews to spotlight here. I'm going to read one. Mike, I'll have you read the other.
Sure.
But the first thing I want to reference is the Pitchfork review, which is also kind of legendary because not the score. The score is 8 points something or other, whatever. They got Best New Music. Of course, it did well. It's Pitchfork. But it's about what the person said in the first paragraph of her review. This is by Dominique Leone. And what she says about the album here says so much about its content and about the mentality behind it.
At the break in Winter's Love from Animal Collective's feral, sentimental Sung Tongs, when the guitar picks up and Avey Tare and Panda Bear's voices flail like children who know they'll never die, it occurs to me that youth isn't always wasted on the young. This is an old cliche about how kids can never really appreciate the finer aspects of immaturity. In fact, it's their immaturity and naivete that all the gray adults crave like zombies. It's a child's lack of self-conscious and common sense that make them holy, just as it's an adult's knowledge of their own mortality that makes them a little bit dead. However, even if the sickly, aching adults might long for days spent wasting precious time and forgetting precious lessons, most of them wouldn't turn back the clock if given the chance. Youth isn't wasted on the young at all, because only kids on holiday could afford to leave their hearts exposed for so long, to sing as loudly, and to take so much for granted. Rather, wisdom is wasted on the old. Jeff, that's such a pretentious review. Come on, man.
Oh, no, I absolutely get what she's saying.
I feel like she's got something else to say and could write a better article about actual mortality and immaturity. And I don't know, maybe it's just been being written through the guise of this album, and maybe that's brilliant. I don't know.
Well, let me say this. What she brings about in this first paragraph of the review is the idea that there's this adage of wisdom is wasted on the young. I've heard it too, where like college is wasted on the young, or some variant of that. You're too young to appreciate the fact that you have all this time to be young or to play around or to whatever.
Your job is to learn. How great is that? Yeah.
Like all you have to do, that's all your responsibilities are. And that's completely wrong. And I agree with this take on it, because even though I have bills to pay and I have episodes to edit and I have a job that I have to go to, I'm doing pretty much exactly what I love doing, which is doing a show where I don't have to worry about sponsors and all sorts of other content. I have a job, but I love what I do. I'm so thankful for the position I'm in. It doesn't matter what I'm making as much as it is that I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And yes, there's people that turn up their nose at that and say, you need to do something that gets you money. It doesn't matter.
Right. Why are you even doing this? If you're not making money off of it, if your readership or your listenership isn't in the millions, why even bother doing what you're doing? I'm enjoying doing what I'm doing. Who are you to tell me that it's not worth it?
There's an immaturity in the subject matter, but there's a maturity in the way that they express that subject matter.
There's an immaturity in dedicating decades to simply providing a platform of information and doing nothing with it in a monetary fashion. And why would you bother doing that? Sure.
So that is specific to us. When we look at it through what Animal Collective are doing, I can absolutely identify the idea of wisdom is wasted on the old. I mean, if you look at a track like Who Could Win a Rabbit, we're visiting friends, which is connecting to a new set of friends and having to get used to this new environment. It is those experiences, but from the perspective of these two people and the way that they vocalize that and the way that they put it into their music and the production, it's without boundaries. It's without pretense. It actually has a place in their catalog in particular with being self-indulgent, but reining it in to bring apart this concept. And I think they do it in an excellent, excellent fashion. Oh yeah, the language is totally pretentious. Don't get me wrong. But I think the point behind what she's saying here makes tons of sense in relation to what you're getting from this album. Now,
you pulled me back around again. Fine.
In contrast to that, I'm going to bring up a review from this guy, Lawrence Station. I've never heard of this person before, shakingthrough.net. I've never heard of before either, but this was an interesting line from that website, and I just want to bring it up here. He says, before it sounded like Animal Collective sought only to please themselves. Sung Tongs sounds like a concession to the rest of us, and that's not a very exciting prospect from such a unique and potentially great band.
The fascinating thing about that quote is that it's written in a pre-Merriweather world where, no, that's the concession. This was just a step along the way. And I don't even think it was a half step. I think it was only a quarter step of the way to Merriweather Post Pavilion.
It's so true. You're absolutely right, because, I'll agree with him on the idea that they made a concession to get an audience.
That thing you played me earlier, that was insane nonsense. So yes, this is a concession along the way. Sure. But now in retrospect, when we look at it, like, oh, it wasn't that big of a divergence.
If you want the band to remain self-indulgent, okay, fine, then that's your disappointment. And I get that. For the rest of us who maybe would like something adventurous out there, I need an entrance point. I say I disagree with this, but I actually find it really interesting to see from the other side of things. If you're already with them and you enjoyed them through these previous albums, then yes, this is a concession. Great. Let's bring it over to further listening. What else you can listen to after taking in Sung Tongs. If you like where this has gone, you want to go further down this path. Yeah, totally makes sense. You can definitely go back into the earlier stuff of Animal Collective. You can go forward with Animal Collective. The album Feels from 2005 was really enjoyable. Strawberry Jam even goes further. In fact, there's a total progression from Sung Tongs to Feels, Strawberry Jam, and then Merriweather Post Pavilion. There's a definite progression, but do not leave out the EPs. Animal Collective does something really fascinating where they will go on tour to preview new stuff, and then they'll go and record it. Once it's on CD or vinyl, they go and start touring absolutely new stuff. But the EPs are a little bit of an outlier where they'll take the stuff that didn't make it onto the album and put it out anyway. And what came out after Sung Tongs was the EP Prospect Hummer. This is an EP that the band did with a then forgotten British folk singer, Vashti Bunyan, and it's fascinating. I mean, there's great melodicism here. I would say not as crazy as Sung Tongs, but they're written within the same era, and Vashti's voice is really sweet here. I don't want to leave out the EPs from the rest of their catalog because there's such great music on those two. Apart from that, if you want to venture outside of Animal Collective, Mike, I'm so anticipating your response to this. I would recommend going into Grizzly Bear territory.
Yeah.
Grizzly Bear does follow a lot of what Animal Collective does in terms of being a bit self-indulgent and going in their own way on things. Vecatimus is an interesting album. Yellow House goes into some crazy prog territory.
I'm actually going to recommend, it's contemporary with it, that Mondo Grosso album, Next Wave. It was from 2003. If you're looking for something with that kind of repetitive style, lots of good acoustic guitar in it as well, kind of driving it, just ignore the awful cover, Fight for Your Right, skip that track, listen to the entire rest of the album.
And play Luminous.
Yes, play Luminous for sure. Remaster's coming out. That's my non-paid plug.
Great. That's going to finish our take on this Animal Collective album. We will certainly come back to Animal Collective later on. We're going to do something a little different next time, but
that was our review of Sung Tongs by Animal Collective. We are always interested in hearing what you have to say about the albums we review. Join the discussion on our subreddit or send us your take, feedback at low-fidelity.info.
Next time on the show, we are going to begin taking a peek at the musical innovations of composer Steve Reich by examining a few of his earliest works. Until then, thank you for listening to Low Fidelity, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.